I'd like to read you a small story by Paulo Coelho. There was once a businessman who was sitting by the beach in a small Brazilian village. As he sat, he saw a Brazilian fisherman rowing a small boat towards the shore, having caught quite a big fish. The businessman was impressed and asked the fisherman, "How long does it take you to catch so many fish?" The fisherman replied, "Oh, just a short while." "Then why don't you stay longer at sea and catch even more?" The businessman was astonished. "This is enough to feed my whole family," the fisherman said. The businessman then asked, "So what do you do for the rest of the day?" The fisherman replied, "Well, I usually wake up early in the morning, go out to sea, catch a few fish, then go back and play with my kids. In the afternoon, I take a nap with my wife, and evening comes, I join my buddies in the village for a drink, we play guitar, sing and dance throughout the night." The businessman offered a suggestion to the fisherman. "I am a PhD in business management. I could help you to become a more successful person. From now on, you should spend more time at sea and try to catch as many fish as possible. When you have saved enough money, you could buy a bigger boat and catch even more fish. Soon you will be able to afford to buy more boats, set up your own company, your own production plant for canned food and distribution network. By then you will have moved out of this village and to São Paulo, where you can set up HQ to manage your other branches." The fisherman asked, "And after that?" The businessman laughed heartily. "After that you can live like a king in your own house, and when the time is right, you can go public and float your shares in the stock exchange, and you will be rich." The fisherman asked, "And after that?" The businessman said, "After that, you can finally retire, you can move to a house by the fishing village, wake up early in the morning, catch a few fish, then return home to play with your kids, have a nice afternoon nap with your wife, and when evening comes, you can join your buddies for a drink, play the guitar, sing and dance throughout the night." The fisherman was puzzled. "Isn't that what I'm doing now?" This parable is a beautiful analogy for the theme of progress we've been reflecting on in the last few episodes of the podcast. We asked our listeners to share some thoughts of their own. Here's one of them sharing his initial reflections.
I think my personal situation has always led me to think about progress as wanting more. I want to move things on professionally. I want to achieve more. I want to be on to that next thing. That next thing might be a new organization to work for. That might be new people to work with. That might be a new big project to work on. We often refer to the fact that we're making progress or advancing our current situation. Do we link this to the idea that actually making progress is about making an improvement, or maybe we even connect it to success? So does that not give us this insight into the fact that we're not actually happy or content or believe in our current situation? There's always this need to improve. There's always this need to progress into something else. Is this about self-fulfillment? We need to be seen to be making progress, whether that's personally or professionally. But really, it comes back to that question. Am I truly happy with my current situation? And if so, maybe progress is different. Maybe progress is about being connected to who I am now rather than who I want to become.
It seems that the act of reflecting itself helped surface some deeper insight. Let's listen to a second anonymous listener.
One of the issues that really drives the progress paradigm is that of economic growth, that we always need to be growing economically, either individually or in our businesses, in our organizations. And my job actually is a business consultant. So I work with these small business leaders all the time, trying to explore growth with them. And it's really interesting. The more I talk to them as a growth partner, that actually they don't want economic growth. That's actually not what they're after. At the end of the day, they just want to be spending more time with their families, doing the things they love. In fact, they don't want growth. They actually want simplicity.
Is there just an inbuilt drive for development that comes over us as an impulse and takes over our actions? What distinguishes between the fisherman and the businessman? And does the act of pausing and asking what we're hoping to achieve or have give us agency over our actions? To what extent are these deeper desires driving what we consider progress? As this is the final episode of this series of our podcast, we were hoping to give you a little more clarity on this topic. But as you'll hear, the speakers evoked a variety of considerations, ranging from the desire for simplicity rather than complexity, the tension between being and doing, and the propelling power of discomfort as a driver for progress. We hope that you will take this episode as an invite to explore what progress means to you. Last night I was having a conversation with a group of people who were invited to reflect, but one of the people was present there, reflecting on how much you are a human doing and how much you are a human being and how much are you just being human. One of the other participants mentioned that actually for him it's about bringing the human being into the human doing. So once we can really land our being human fully in our human doing in the moment, that's sort of like the magic sweet spot. I know from my own experience, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, that, when you bring the human doing and the human being together in the present moment, it's not as if nothing happens. I wonder sometimes if people are afraid that if they stop doing, they'll just sit on the couch like a couch potato, like nothing will propel out of them. So I went on to challenge one of the participants around, who are you when you're not performing? And it was still really active. But he was like, I'm running through land and landscape and being one with nature. I was like, yeah, there's so much expression there. So it just got me to question around, like, okay, what is it that we attach this idea of progress to particularly? And what is the fear around if we let go of particular forms of human doing, what might happen to me, to us?
I wonder if I, or we as a species, I wonder sometimes how useful the divide of being and doing actually is. We place a different value on one than the other in the world that we live in. And then there was something you said earlier that it's almost like, what's the driver for maybe both our being and our doing, but probably more primarily the action, the doing bit, and this dissatisfaction, and that something in the future will be better, will be more complete. I will feel more fulfilled. It will feel more comfortable. Whatever it is, I will feel happier. So that feels like quite a dissatisfaction. Feels like quite an interesting motivator for progress on a number of levels. So Peter Rollins, who's a philosopher, he says that part of his role in life is just helping people accept the fact that we're always going to feel dissatisfied. It's just part of being a human. And I wonder whether maybe if we still stay with the separation of the being and the doing, maybe in the being bit, that's where the work of sitting with that dissatisfaction is almost, it's something wired, something in us that we're always going to feel a bit dissatisfied. When it can trip us up is when we then suddenly go into action because we think that is going to solve it, as opposed to, no, it's just part of life. Then I make a different choice about my human doing because I'm not chasing a dissatisfaction. Maybe I'm doing this thing because it comes from this place of aliveness. I'm not chasing, I'm doing something because it brings some life to me.
So I don't know if we have an answer to this, but I'm reminded of, and I can't remember the name of the neuroscientist, which is really unfortunate, but we'll plop it in the show notes if I'll reference it later. She's the one that wrote Dopamine Nation. And she said our survival was designed around basically every time we have some form of ecstasy or pleasure, the brain, it's like a seesaw and it seesaws back to pain, but it's like a little bit more heavy on the pain than the pleasure. So we go a little bit further down than we ever came up, so to speak. And she, but that's by design, because if that wouldn't happen to us, then we'd be enjoying our full bellies full of bananas, and then we'd get eaten by the next creature that came by because we wouldn't feel any motivation to keep ourselves safe or to run away. And so I wonder if, in some ways there is just fundamentally this acceptance that we're always gonna be activated by some form of pain, dissatisfaction that is neurologically built into who we are.
There's a phrase that I've heard a few times, and I'm not sure whether it's you or someone else has said it, about this idea that our technologies, and I don't mean just technology as in digital technology, but our technologies, our tool making, if you like, has progressed at a different rate than our evolution. So we haven't caught up with our own technologies yet. So we're still, from an evolutionary point of view, behaving as if we don't have these other technologies. And so for us, right, these two things are colliding in somehow. I'm trying to get better at thinking before I speak. So there's a big pause as I'm thinking. So when I come out, I don't start 3 different sentences at the same time and finish none of them. So listeners, I hope you are observing my work, my progress. So for me, it feels like we are not fully aware of the amount of choice that we actually have. And then the divide of being and doing. We're always going to be doing both, like you said at the beginning. We can't separate those two, but it's to do with the source of the doing.
Maybe the only thing we can do is be more self-aware about the fact that our wiring is designed to create a sort of interplay between pain and pleasure seeking. And then see if we can go back to maybe Mariah's episode of the podcast. How are we able to zoom out and take a higher order perspective on when I behave in XYZ ways, what implications are there for not just myself, but those around me? And then can I zoom back in and say, given the mechanism that I will do this sort of pain and pleasure seeking, how do I steer that pain and pleasure seeking in such a direction that, is generative, resourceful, helpful for my environment?
So in there, it sounds like I'm aware of something. Do you know what I mean? And therefore I make a choice as opposed just doing this unconscious thing. But in the second listener's little insight, it's really interesting. So he obviously works to support businesses, and he's realized that why people come to him is not because they want growth per se. What they want is simplicity. So they come to him to help create a simpler business, a simpler way of working. I mean, he does tech stuff, so he does automation and things, but he says what he hears is that that's what they're looking for, something that is simpler. They want more time. They want something that takes maybe less energy to do so that they have more energy for other things. Like it might be with family or pastimes or whatever. So maybe it's the progress or the movement is towards a shifting of what takes my energy.
I wonder if, in some ways, that's a bit of an illusion. And I know that the verdict isn't out, and I know that there are different sources that say different things. But this Dopamine Nation interview, I remember her saying that according to her data that she's looking at, most humans in the world who are living above a particular economic standard of life have more time for leisure and play and etc. than we've ever had over the course of human history. But that's not what we're experiencing. I know that you read The Way Home by Mark Boyle last week. Shall I read a little bit from this book? He says, "My ways are often described, sometimes by myself, as the simple life. Interpreted one way, it is entirely misleading, as my life, my livelihood, is far from simple. It is actually quite complex, but is made up of 1,000 small, simple things. In comparison, my old life in the city was quite simple, but was made up of 1,000 small, complex things. The innumerable technologies of industrial civilization are now so complex, they make the lives of ordinary people simple. Too simple. I, for one, got bored doing the same thing day in, day out, using complex technologies which I suspected made those who manufactured them bored too." What I think is really interesting about what he suggests is, although we have this complexity of technology, what it feels like we're doing as humans is we're just doing this redundant, similar thing over and over, as opposed to when we were living very close to nature. Nature is inherently complex and never the same, so no two tasks are ever repetitive in that sense. But we've created this story of, I'm going to go and live the simple life, to which we equate living in the woods in a cabin, with a wood burning stove, as opposed to I'm going to live this complex life, which is this city dwelling, technology filled sort of existence.
I was having a conversation with one of my children. Now, we were talking about AI, and he was talking about he really likes and enjoys the struggle of learning something, of finding it and working it out for himself. And that is part, for him, is what is fundamental to his human experience. And then I wonder, listening to you talk, I wonder if actually we've confused ourselves by trying to take away some of those things that bring us struggle. And sometimes the struggle might be in the repetition. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm doing this thing again. I was just reading some stuff by David White this morning about routine and about how we can use routine as ritual. To this, I wonder whether we're starting to take out some things that we deem as routine, and boring, and actually they may be the things that give us the struggle that we need to experience as being human. And I feel confused even talking about it. So I wonder whether somehow we've confused ourselves in the midst of all this, and we're starting to take away some of what it actually does mean to be a human being, is to struggle with some stuff and have some stuff that we need to do it over and over again. And actually we used to call that ritual. But now what we do is we create loads of complex systems so to automate it or do something with it so we don't have to do it. So we have time to do this other thing, but the other thing doesn't really exist.
We want to end this series on the myth of progress with a consideration that maybe as humans, we are all just doing what we think will lead to a sense of inner peace, a deep breath, a feeling of completion. But in this, we have a responsibility, both for ourselves and for others. We ask you to consider where your drivers for progress come from, and when you might be imposing them on those around you, your kids, partner, colleagues, friends. When are you being the businessman when you could be the fisherman? We leave you with one of Rob's poems.
Step up. You ask me to step up, to claim my inherent authority. You ask me to step up, to be more than you and I can currently see. You ask me to step up, to potentially become less like me. You ask me to step up, invite me to live your projection. You ask me to step up, to recreate the things that replicate the very thing that we want to uncreate. You ask me to step up. I am so unsure of what you mean.